crowding out effect and the crowding in effect. Let's say this is the loanable funds market for both private and public funds. If the government runs a deficit, it has to borrow money to pay its bills. Because it runs a deficit, it demands more of these loanable funds. This will cause the demand curve to shift to the right, driving the real interest rate up. What this does is it crowds out private investment. Do you notice here at the original equilibrium before the government ran a deficit? Watch what happens when the government does run a deficit and borrows in this loanable funds market. Do you notice as the interest rate rises, the quantity of savings goes up, but the quantity of investment by firms and by consumers with interest-sensitive consumption, this then goes down to this point here. So what the public borrowing does is it crowds out the private sector borrowing because at higher real interest rates, the quantity demanded goes from here to here. Now on the other side of the coin is what's called the crowding in effect. If the governments reduce their deficits, they don't have to borrow as much in the loanable funds market. This shifts the demand to the left, lowering the real interest rate in the economy. Gregory Mankiw describes this differently. He looks at this as the private market for loanable funds. And as the government increases deficit spending, then this will reduce the supply of loanable funds, driving the real interest rate up. So in both situations, the real interest rate went upward. It's just described differently. Gregory Mankiw describes this as just the private market for loanable funds. When we're looking at both the private and the public market for loanable funds, then as the government runs a deficit, this increases demand, driving the real interest rate up. So whatever you do, don't shift both the demand and the supply, or else you'll be marked down on some of your exams. Choose one way of describing what happens with real interest rates, whether you believe it's an increase in demand for those funds or whether you believe in what Gregory Mankiw says is that the supply of loanable funds in the private loanable funds market decreases. Choose one.